Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're talking with Gregg Bird, John Dean, and Andrew Rateaver about wildland urban interface fires. So welcome, you three. We'll go ahead and start by letting you introduce yourselves. Gregg, can you start?
Thanks, Ashley. I'm Gregg Bird. I've been with NCBRT for 8 years now. Full-time, I work as an emergency management coordinator for Grand Traverse County, Michigan. I have 33 years experience in public safety, fire, 911, emergency services, and lots of experience with wildfire planning and preparedness.
Hi, I'm John Dean. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and work for Phoenix Fire Department, assigned as a fire captain, special operations. I've been in the fire service actually since 1976, so old guy. But probably some people are wondering why Phoenix, and in the last few years, we've seen a lot more urban interface fires, so that's why I'm here today. I've been with NCBRT for almost 20 years.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Hey, I'm Ashy. I'm Andrew Rateaver, a instructor with NCBRT for the past 8 years. Prior to that, I was in law enforcement with the City of Berkeley Police Department in California, close to 30 years there. Not only in patrol, but also in the command element, where I've had an opportunity to respond to several wildland urban interface fires, including and starting with the 1991 East Bay Hills Oakland fire, and then also in the 2000s to the Butte County Paradise Camp Fire, the Tubbs Fire in Napa, and several others. I'm also part of the local county search and rescue team. I've been doing that for close to 40 years, where we also respond to wildland urban interface fires. And also now in retirement, I work as a volunteer ranger with the U.S. Forest Service in the Tahoe Sierra Nevada. So happy to be with you all today.
Sorry. So can we start off today by explaining the concept of the wildland urban interface and its significance within the context of wildland or wildfire management?
You know, it's a good point to start, a good starting place, Ashley. We're seeing the people wanting to kind of get outside of the city limits now. They're looking for nature. They're looking for areas where they can not only recreate, but also live. And part of this may be a phenomenon that's post-pandemic. People are looking to find and live in spaces that are closer to nature, wildland spaces where there are trees. So oftentimes we're seeing that people are building or buying right in areas where there used to be forest, or there still is forest, and they're inserting houses in there. This is a kind of a not relatively new phenomenon, but it's certainly seen an increase in recent years. And with that, we've also seen the development of fires. Where there's people, there's going to be fires. And these fires are happening in wooded areas. And where that residential area meets the forest, if you will, we call that the wildland urban interface.
Yeah, that's a great point. With coming into the preparedness aspect of it, is we're seeing a lot of sprawl, right? A community has one of two choices really to build, and that's either out or up. And as we're seeing that further out into encroaching upon those natural spaces and wanting that not so much be in the inner city, we're seeing those hazards come in, along with the advent of the short-term rental market. Of investors, farming communities, etc., seeing that they can sell their properties, they can retire. And so that interface, potentially our zoning ordinances aren't catching up with the appropriate buffers as well as they should be for that the type of sprawl.
I think for us in Phoenix, what I've seen, I've been out here for just shy of 28 years, is that I remember when I first moved out here, how if we were going to go north, looking at the city, there's a certain line, and everything after that was pretty much desert, and for miles and miles. And that's not true anymore. It's just like what Rat was talking about before, was people are building homes. They want to get out of the city. They're moving more north, and then they continue to push more north. We have plant communities moving north. But also what we have here in the Phoenix metro area are a lot of industry and businesses coming in here. We're going to have one of the largest chip manufacturers in the U.S., and is where they put their plant was in the middle of a desert area. So it continues to, as they continue to build in lands that have been unoccupied, it pushes us up right to those forest areas. And I think that's the difference that I've seen here in the Phoenix metro area.
Thank you. So what are some of the key factors that contribute to the increasing frequency and severity of these wildfires?
John, you may jump on this as well. In terms of the statistics, we can look back through history and see the frequency of fires or the severity of fires. But if you even just look as far as last year wasn't all that bad of a fire year. Actually, it was mostly normal in a lot of the regions around the country and around the world. But we see that the fire severity, though, increasing. That's because I think to a large part to climate change. And I think that contributes to not only increasing heat temperatures, but also with the greater amount of moisture that we're seeing, not only drought, but killing off the vegetation, but also when it rains heavy, we get more fuel loads and there's more stuff to burn. John, what do you think?
I totally agree with that. Last year we had one of the hottest months of record in Phoenix Metro, where we were 115 to 120 for over about a month, and with that, folks know that Arizona doesn't receive a lot of rain at all. We were down below level. If you look, it's not just the 1 year; it's year after year after year after year. As I've lived here, it's warmer every summer. We pretty much have less rain every year. And when we do get those early, let's say the late winter, early spring rains, just like Brad was saying, vegetation starts to grow, and right behind it, we're not getting the water to continue that. So now we have all the vegetation, the heat, and the heat when it gets hot. Next thing you know, we're running on these fires again that we haven't seen. For me, historically, being here for the years that I've lived in Phoenix, we had a small response to fires over the years, but probably in the last 6-7 years, it has definitely increased. As far as, and I think it's everything we've talked about, moving up in the sprawl, as well as all the temperature increase, the thermal warming. If people that's my thoughts on it. As far as just an increase of heat, less water, more drought, it just ripens everything.
Yeah, that's a great point, you do. And let's look at the factor too, as we're building out into these areas and we have an influx. Let's look at the threats created by, mechanical equipment, automobiles traveling out through here, creating sparks or improper disregarding, smoking materials. With the advent of building into these urban interface areas, then, you have houses that burn, for lack of a better term, or there's people there, like Rat, you said in the first part of where there's people, there's fire. So now in these natural areas that are either struggling by drought or with, overgrowth because of the rain and the heat, here we had the low snowfall last year. So we're not drought, but everything is dry. So when we incorporate all those factors and then we add extra hazards, I think it doesn't really take a lot of numbers people to realize the occurrences of fires in these wildland urban areas are going to increase.
Greg, you just hit on something, and living in the Phoenix metro area, we don't see a lot of snow, but our higher elevations, 7,000, 8,000 feet, some of the folks with live in those areas, and so we do get some winters here, and this winter in the past we saw a lot of snow. We saw a lot of snow. So again, the upper elevations ripen themselves to that environment where all of a sudden we have that growth, and the next thing behind it, we don't get the rain, but the heat heats up and dries everything out. And just like Rad said, and then you have people that are up there and they don't recognize that. I truly don't believe. And I think the people that have lived there for years do a great job in planning. But I think as people are moving out from, let's say, Metro Phoenix area and move into those different environments, they may not be aware of some of the preparedness things that need to be done.
So, Greg, let me ask you: is it you think it's the people and the houses being brought up in those areas, constructed, or is it also the aging infrastructure that may be there? That
Absolutely.
yeah, so we may be getting new houses, but the infrastructure that's there, and primarily I'm speaking of power lines above ground, susceptible to wind damage, drought and all that, versus few of them being undergrounded or hardened in some way. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
That's a tribute to it. And with the climate change, there's more thunderstorms, there's more lightning.
yeah.
And so the averages of when you have an increase in all of that, you have aging infrastructure, the increase then in having the fire occurrences are going to increase as well.
Yeah.
If I can tag on to that, I think here in the metro area, like I said, the growth has been tremendous. And I think a lot of these utility companies, whether it be gas, their gas lines or power lines or whatever it may be, in areas that probably, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I don't want to say they didn't envision the growth, but I think now we have that, we've moved into those areas that were less susceptible to, to just the growth, the building, and then fire potentials. So
Absolutely. So what sorts of challenges are you seeing the communities in this area face when it comes to wildfire prevention and response?
Well, I'll start off with that one. And I think it's that if they're used to living in a more urban or suburban area and they're moving out into more of a treat or a wilderness area, if you will, a rural area, they're just not accustomed to proper prevention techniques, keeping brush away from your homes and being careful how you discard fireplace materials or barbecuing materials. They take for granted of how the mechanics of a fire and how fast a wildfire can spread. So part of it is just the understanding of they live in a different area than what they're accustomed to. Two, I believe it's preparedness as a whole. We as the local officials, I think we have to undertake a new, more aggressive initiative in order to get the word out, to educate these folks, and not only the people that are living there, but the visitors that are going through and impacting these areas. And then three, I think we need to work with our private partners, so the utility owners, and try and find a more public-private partnership to one, help encourage them to upgrade their systems and utilities, but two, also help us educate consumers of things to be on the lookout. Because if we can't prepare and prevent 100% of everything, the early recognition that helps us respond faster will inevitably help keep some of those fires contained easier and quicker.
Lots of good points there, Greg. Ashley, I almost hate to go there, but it comes down to funding as well. There's these communities, they are strapped. They're typically rural, small. Maybe they don't have a large tax base because I think, as Greg mentioned before, the vacation rentals and whatnot. So they may not just have the funding to do all of the preparedness things, the fire-wise communities, to get those communities to be spun up and safe. Very much like a crime prevention or a neighborhood watch. We do it for crime, but we don't necessarily do it for fire prevention. But interestingly enough, and guys, maybe you jump in on this. Have you seen that residents are actually losing their homeowners insurance coverage due to the wildfire issue? And we see this kind of happening in the Western Pacific and Northwest, but homeowners associations and homeowners insurance policies are losing their coverage because of the wildfire risk. And that is having an impact as well. So certainly a challenge for residents.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because you hit on a couple things, funding and insurance, and we see it. And if take a look like at Florida, you know, with the hurricane. So you see these natural disasters in these states that are being hit, that are being impacted by the insurance companies, right? The inability to get insurance, right? So it only goes to say that we're going to see those same issues when it comes to people that live in probably those more rural areas, wooded areas where where the increased fire potential is. I think that's a huge deal, and most people probably wouldn't know that until when it comes time to go to renew their policies. You know, if that's the way the insurance companies are going. So I absolutely agree with that. I think the second thing you talked about was funding, and if you look at historically some of the different areas that have been impacted by some of these wildland urban interface issues, let's say like in Maui, right? When you start looking at some of these after action reports, you'll see that a lot of times the funding is based upon kind of what their average usage has been, you know, whether it be on the fire side or EMS or wildland. And I think that's what the communities are challenged with, was to increase the resources and build up the infrastructure and these different things that are needed. Like you said, Brad, it takes money, and a lot of these communities are small. So where do they reach out to? Is it something that the state can assist with? Is it something that can be on a federal level? I think those are the challenges, because I think if you look at any agency, fire, law enforcement, EMS across the country, most of the time we build up our agencies based upon the average responses that are done on a daily basis.
Yeah. Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, those are great points, and I wanted to add with that too, of funding and personnel, and on the grant side of things, grants are getting cut. I look at emergency management. Some of my local officials described us as the insurance policy, but when nothing happens and the budgets have to be cut, sometimes the insurance policies, you have to lower your coverage. And that we're seeing that organically post-COVID and across the board with fire departments, fire personnel, whether it was COVID or just time of the great retirement, we're losing all this institutional knowledge. And where are we cutting our programs that aren't necessary? Our public education programs, getting out there, and combined with the cuts in grant funding and the availability of grant funding, then with the loss of institutional knowledge, who has the experience to know these grants are out there, and we can, all of it is little bits and pieces that I think are contributing to the whole large picture that ends with we're having these fires start and they're turning into massive conflagrations instead of controllable or preventable incidents.
Greg, you're exactly right when you talked about the staffing. A wildland firefighter is not paid all that great. They're relatively low. I know there's been some issues in government where they're looking to have a congressional mandate to increase the pay rate of wildland firefighters, but it's not a desirable job. It's hard work, and you don't get paid a lot, and it's taking on another fire job in perhaps a metropolitan area where it's full time versus a seasonal. So it's just not an attractive job, and they're losing that, like you said, that institutional knowledge. Good question, Ashley.
Yeah.
So kind of going along with that, can you provide an overview of the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders in managing wildfire risks in these areas?
I'm going to go right there and say it's a large responsibility. The stakeholder is the resident who lives in the WUI area, that wildland urban interface. And that starts with defensible space, hardening the home, and becoming fire wise. So I'm going to land it right there on the shoulder of the resident. Guys, what do you think?
kind of like the wooey area. That has a nice ring to it. But you're exactly right with that. It does start with the resident. But today in 2024, we spend a lot of time not wanting to be informed. And whereas I'm experiencing right now with messaging and public information, there's still a percentage of the population that is, I didn't know, you didn't tell me, you didn't help me, it's not my fault. And I'm not saying everyone's like that, but the responsibility falls upon the jurisdiction. And when I say the jurisdiction, I mean either the folks that are signing and allowing the building, and down to the fire protection agency, as well as the local unit of government. There is a responsibility there to educate folks. And if there is a fire, then take proper punitive damages in order to limit, or I don't want to, I guess, teach a lesson to say, hey, you can't do that. And this is a bad thing. And so there's got to be a cost involved in that, or a fine, or some sort of damage restoration.
Brad, I have a question for you. Do you think folks that live, and we'll use California per se, seems like California usually has several wildfires during the season. Do you think those folks are better prepared just because they're more frequent versus, and I'll use the state of Arizona, right? So I think the higher elevations, I think the folks are probably better prepared because they've either been, had a wildland fire that had occurred in the previous, or know someone that did. But I'm just curious if it's location and then the frequency of fires potentially, where would we see a more prepared community?
I would say yes, John. I think that's an interesting point. And as an example, I might point out to the Camp Fire that leveled the town of Paradise in Butte County, California. In the wake of that, the media coverage, the devastation that happened, there have been fires subsequent to that incident. But and also in the same area, talk about the fire interval there. But they've fires have happened again, but not with the same consequences. I think lots of the studies have indicated that it's because people are they're aware, they know what the potential that can happen, so they are heeding warnings, and they are being more responsive to the preventative measures up front. And the other part of it, unfortunately, in the campfire area, is that a lot of the residents never came back.
Yeah, I think looking at some of the different after action reports, some of the things that I saw was, and I couldn't agree more. Right, it starts with the homeowner as far as out there, and as far as fire wise, and taking care of their property. So the reason why I'm asking that is, so I'm a new person. I moved from metro area out to those areas. I may not recognize some of the things that need to be done unless if someone shares that with me as a new homeowner, right? Because I've left the city, I move into those areas, I want to be remote, and I'm in a nice wooded area, and it's paradise, right? For compared to where living in the city. But now, as far as it goes, kind of what Greg was saying is now, is someone going to come out and tell me like, hey, you need to do these things, and do I take heed to that, or do I just let it go? And then unfortunately, I put myself in that right situation.
And Ashley, I think that brings up the next point on this whole, in terms of stakeholders, is the fire service, and whether that be a function of the fire department or the city government, town government, but having a program of inspection, not just fire prevention, but defensible space inspection, having inspectors who are specifically trained in that to come out and on a routine annual basis check for defensible spaces. I think that's a stakeholder issue for local fire, for local government to have a program like that. And guys, there's several of them out there. There's Greg, there's Fire USA, there's Fire Wise. All of these they're like crime prevention or like neighborhood watch, but rather than going for guys with guns, It's stopping fire. It's fire prevention and defensible space.
Yeah, and I think there's a part of that. Some of the insurance companies that provide that fire protection, right? I think you have some of them in California. That comes with that, right? When you buy that policy, you have to have that prevention piece as well. And both of you, it brings me to mind as you're bringing up your points about proper mitigation. When we have a fire, it's just like a hurricane or a tornado or a flood. There has to be officials and folks that come together, community, private and public, to get together and say, okay, this happened. We recognize that. Now, how do we make sure that maybe we can't prevent this from happening again, but how do we limit the damage next time? And we're seeing that in places like Gatlinburg, Tennessee. They realized that some of their things were early warning and their emergency alert system. And so they put a more robust system in place, as well as some of their zoning laws and how they govern that interface between the wildland and the development. And that's a huge ripe tourism industry there. So I don't know some of the outcomes yet, but I know the intent and that mitigation, that resilience part of that is all leading into trying to limit the impact of another fire.
So the stakeholders starts with the resident, includes the fire service, local government, but let's not forget the cops. The law enforcement has a specific role in this in terms of preparing for a wildland fire beforehand, working with fire suppression agencies to understand what their job is, what their expectation is, and largely law enforcement is responsible for evacuation. You don't want to be making evacuation plans on the day you have to do the evacuation. So that pre-planning, understanding ICS, understanding interoperability matters. So that's, again, a huge stakeholder issue.
Building relationships.
Boy, there's a concept, right? But Ashley, I'm going to even go a step further. And guys, you jump in here if you want. I think it also involves human resources, human services, for those that have functional needs, for evacuating of livestock, animal care, humane services. It's really a whole holistic concept when we're talking about who's the stakeholders in this, because there's a lot out there in that wildland urban interface, a lot of agencies.
In the emergency management world, we call that whole community. And
There you go.
it really is, and getting everybody involved and building relationships. I can't face that or emphasize that enough. Of within the plans, right? The plans are ink on paper, but it's the planning process. I think Dwight Eisenhower first said that in response to World War II. The plans can be not as pertinent, but the planning process is everything. It's that building of the relationships. And we need to be including everything from HOAs to community groups to the private sector, because if we all do a little bit, then the reliance isn't so heavily on one facet.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up our conversation for this time. So thank you to Gregg, John, and Andrew for joining us today. Next time, we'll dive deeper into the topic of fire mitigation in the wildland urban interface. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Amy.
If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.